Living expenses? What do you mean by that? I've never received anything like that before. My mother-in-law looked genuinely baffled. Hey, what's going on? Brian, explain it properly. My husband, who was shrinking before us, was cornered by both myself and my mother-in-law. My name is Carol. I'm a 37-year-old office worker. I live with my husband, Brian, and my mother-in-law. Brian and I met through a mutual friend and quickly hit it off. We were married within 4 months of meeting each other. Since we were both over 35, our parents and in-laws were overjoyed. Our relationship was also great. Since our first visit for marriage introductions, my mother-in-law and I had gone out for meals several times and had become close. Initially, we lived separately but close by. However, after my father-in-law passed away, we moved in together. Despite what people say, there was no mother-in-law bullying and our life was going smoothly. My mother-in-law would do the housework instead of me. I felt guilty, but as often as I got home late, I depended on her. It might sound odd, but I was grateful and had been giving her some living expenses and a small token of appreciation through my husband. However, that didn't mean I could leave everything to her. But since she always said it was fine, I had been relying on her. Since my husband's food consumption has increased recently, I have become a bit worried about whether the amount of money I provide for our daily expenses will be sufficient. So I decided to discuss this with my husband first. Hey, about the living expenses we're giving to your mom, you've been eating a lot lately and she's been doing all the cooking and cleaning, right? I'm thinking we should increase it a bit. What do you think? Huh? It should be fine, right? She's probably happy that her son and daughter-in-law are living with her and she hasn't said anything about it being insufficient. Don't you think we need to show our appreciation? Not just in words, but in a tangible way. So I'll give a little more next month. Could you pass it on to your mom? At my suggestion, my husband nodded with a happy smile. Really? That's great. I was actually thinking the same thing. Thanks. I thought he was being a little too optimistic, but this wasn't the first time, so I decided not to worry about it. I decided to give a bit more. Then, a little while later, I had a severe accident. I collided with a bike at an intersection. I fractured a bone and had to be hospitalized for 2 weeks. My husband brought me my stuff on the first day. Hey, are you okay? It looks painful. I'll let my mom know. That would be great, thanks. Since it's a shared room, I can't make a call. Could you tell her that I'll contact her once I'm able to move? My husband cheerfully responded, Sure, I got it, and went home. I was a bit worried, but I told myself that's how he always is. But then a week passed. Despite waiting, my husband never came. Not even my mother-in-law. Even if my husband was busy with work, it was unthinkable that my overprotective mother-in-law wouldn't come to visit me when I'm not feeling well. I moved to the lounge room with crutches. There was no contact on my cell phone either. I called my husband first, but he didn't answer. Well, he's probably at work, I thought, and then I called my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law picked up on the third ring. Oh, Carol, you sound beat. What's up? Hi, mother-in-law. You must have heard from Brian, but I'll be in the hospital for another week. So I'm sorry, but I'll need some fresh clothes. What? Hospitalized? What happened? An injury? Illness? I could tell from the other end of the call that my mother-in-law was flustered. My mind was filled with question marks. There was no sign that my mother-in-law was lying. Could it be that Brian forgot to tell his mother? But if that was the case, she would have noticed my absence and called me immediately. Anyway, my mother-in-law quickly said she'd visit and hung up. And 30 minutes later, she appeared in front of me, drenched in sweat. The hospital is about 40 minutes from home by train and foot. She must have hurried over. Thank you for coming, mother-in-law. What did you hear from Brian? You were going on a business trip for 2 weeks. He told me it was sudden, so he asked me to pass it on. Yes, Brian is also on a business trip. At that statement, a possibility dawned on me. My husband might be cheating on me. Why? Because Brian is an illustrator. so he can work from anywhere. But according to him, the home environment is the best for work, and unless something significant comes up, he doesn't go out. Even if there are occasional local meetings, I know that the company doesn't arrange for a meeting that requires a business trip. How do I know? The answer is simple. Because I work in the same company as an administrative staff member. What's wrong? You look pale. Are you feeling unwell? Mother-in-law, our company wouldn't send Brian on a business trip. That's the job of the sales team. I'm in admin, so I don't go on business trips either. At my words, my mother-in-law tilted her head. I wished I could have been as naive. In other words, Brian lied. There's been no notification of his absence for a week, so I guess he's still working. I wonder where he really is. He left his injured wife in the hospital and lied to me. Did Brian tell you where he was going on business? Now that you mention it, he said he was staying in a hotel in Miami, that the company had arranged it. Oh yes, here it is. My mother-in-law showed me the hotel's website she found on her smartphone. It was a hotel we had stayed at during a previous vacation. It was where we stayed for our wedding anniversary. Of course, it was more expensive than other places, not a place where a company would cover the accommodation cost. I felt a headache coming on from such a sloppy alibi. Mother-in-law, this is hard to say, but Brian might be cheating. What? Brian? But this situation does seem suspicious. Oh, isn't this the hotel? Hold on a moment. Let's confirm if he's really there, my mother-in-law said and called somewhere. After a while, she hung up with a smirk on her face. They said they'll check it out for me. First, we need to verify the facts. Turns out that the hotel is run by my mother-in-law's relative. She told Brian about it before, but he either forgot or didn't care. About 10 minutes passed when I got a call from my mother-in-law. The results were damning. My husband, Brian, seemed to be staying overnight at that hotel, and with a woman no less. Although it was not allowed, the situation was special, and my mother-in-law told me the name which Brian was with. I was shocked to hear the name. I know her, actually. She's a friend of mine. Mother-in-law was equally surprised by this revelation. Turns out the other woman was my coworker and friend, Jessica. Jessica works in the same department as Brian. She was even the one who introduced me to him. She had attended our wedding, even giving a speech. Mother-in-law was furious, her face turning bright red. I had to hurriedly stop her from calling Brian. Let's gather solid evidence first. Hire a private detective. After that, I'm going to file for divorce. I can't accept a man who cheats with my friend. I plan to seek alimony, so I'm sorry for the trouble this will cause you, mother-in-law. Don't worry about it. I'll give that idiot son of mine a piece of my mind. How dare he betray such a good wife? When he comes back, he'll get a thrashing. I felt a bit uplifted by mother-in-law's words and started looking for a private detective. A relative of mother-in-law recommended a detective agency, and I decided to hire them. After reading the report they provided, I couldn't help but laugh. Turns out my friend, Jessica, was pretending to be the wife of my husband while they were on location. 3 days before my scheduled discharge from the hospital, I called Brian. I kept it a secret that mother-in-law knew about me. How are you feeling? I'm sorry I've been too busy to visit. I'll definitely pick you up on your discharge day. Do you need anything? No, I'm fine. Sorry for being a bother while you're so busy. Apparently my recovery is taking longer, so my discharge date has been extended. I'm just calling to let you know. I'm borrowing things like pajamas from the hospital, so no need to worry. Looks like I'll be discharged a week from now. Sorry for not being able to support you while you're so busy. Oh, could you withdraw money for the hospital bills? I don't have any cash on hand, so could you do it on my discharge day? I see. That sounds tough. All right, I should be done with my delivery in a week, so I'll go to the bank before picking you up. My mom's been worried too. She's caught a cold and feels bad for not being able to visit you." Brian nonchalantly lying through his teeth. Knowing it was all lies, I had to restrain myself from laughing. "Oh, is that so? Please tell mother-in-law to take care. Did you manage to inform the office? Thank you. Did they say anything about allowances?" "Eh?" "Oh, they did. I'll take care of the procedures. You just rest and recover. Hope you get well soon." "All right, thank you. See you in a week then." I already knew what Brian had told the office about me. I had confirmed it with the office before Brian's call. Brian apparently told the office that he was going on a trip and applied for my leave. So my boss asked right off the bat, "How was the trip? Are you getting good rest?" After I explained my situation, my boss decided to visit the hospital immediately. Not only my boss, but also the HR department came to the hospital. And it turns out I'm entitled to sick leave benefits. I found out that my husband, Brian, has been out of touch for about a week, and he's also running late on his deadlines. The same seems to be true for his mistress. They can't seem to get in touch with her either. It turns out that something like this has been going on for the past 6 months, and it's finally come to a head. So they came to talk to me. I told my bosses that I wanted them not to mention this to Brian or his mistress until a week later, and after that they can impose any punishment they see fit. As planned, I was discharged from the hospital. It seems that Brian had submitted another application for my paid leave, and his mother, my mother-in-law, got a call from him saying that his business trip was extended. Despite my hospital stay being extended because I'm not feeling well, he's extending his vacation with his mistress. It's clear there's no love left for me. I felt a bit sad. I decided to take my paid leave as planned. My boss told me to take as much time as I needed. For a week until Brian returned, my mother-in-law and I prepared to give him a piece of our minds. The day before I was supposed to tell Brian about my discharge from the hospital, I called him. "Hello, how is your mother doing?" "I'm feeling good and I got discharged today. It was sudden, so don't worry about picking me up. I can pay with my credit card." "You're working today, right, Brian?" "Don't worry about me." "What? Really?" "Got it. I have a meeting soon and another one tonight, so I won't be home until late. Sorry." "That's fine. Don't worry about it. I'll take a taxi home." I barely held back a laugh at the sound of the shopping center announcement in the background of Brian's call, and responded. Then I calmly hung up the phone and pressed the button on the voice recorder. I had already heard from the detective that Brian was planning to go shopping today, so I intentionally called him at that time. When I checked the voice recorder, Brian's voice and the announcement were both clearly recorded. Brian had apparently contacted my mother-in-law, telling her that he was actually on vacation with a friend. He claimed it was a working vacation of sorts, so it wasn't exactly a lie. And he said that he had gotten my approval and that I had told him not to tell her about my hospitalizations so as not to worry my mother-in-law. I couldn't help but laugh at Brian's absurd excuses. The detective informed me that Brian had boarded a late-night flight back. My mother-in-law and I laid out all the documents on the table and waited for Brian to return. However, Brian called me and said this. "Sorry, the meeting ran late and I missed the last train. I'll be back on the first train tomorrow." "Is that so? That's tough." "Got it. Sorry I can't pick you up." I responded like that and hung up the phone. After enjoying a 3-week affair trip, it seems he still can't get enough. My mother-in-law was furious, but I found that my love for Brian had completely disappeared, and I was able to remain calm for the discussion. Then, the next day, looking exhausted, Brian came home loaded with souvenirs. "You went on a trip? I didn't hear about that." "Huh? Didn't I tell you? Sorry, my bad. I got friendly with a client and they invited me. Business relationships matter, right?" my husband said nonchalantly as I took a bag from him and led him to the living room. I'm home. Hey, what's up with you, Mom? You look scary, Brian said, plopping down onto a chair with a grin on his face. He seemed to believe that his mother was on his side, but as soon as he saw the documents laid out on the table, his face went pale. I sat next to my mother-in-law and pointed at a photo. Oh yes, you seem to have had quite the fun. Your trip with Jessica. Leaving your injured wife for 3 weeks. Were you in a honeymoon mood? I asked. What's this? Carol, stop fooling around. Brian stammered at me, his face contorting. Unfortunately, this is no joke. I have evidence from a private detective. You were pretty careless, weren't you? Your dinner conversations were totally bugged. Staying at a hotel run by our relatives, you must have thought you wouldn't get caught. At this, Brian's face turned even more shocked. He looked at his mother for help. Mom, it was a lapse in judgment, so A lapse in judgment that lasted 3 weeks seems a bit too long, don't you think? His mother cut him off with a cheerful smile. Brian, who had been hoping for help, was stunned. Here, these are documents for a claim for damages and a divorce application. Fill it out now. Damages? Divorce? Carol, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. The one I truly love is you. Can't you forgive me? Let's start over. In response, I pressed a button on my phone. Out flowed the voices of Brian and Jessica. It was a conversation recorded by the detective, hinting at a divorce with me and a remarriage with Jessica. Brian's face turned even bluer. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. I didn't mean it. I couldn't care less, really, I said, handing him the documents and urging him to write. Please, forgive me. I can't afford to pay any damages. Well, that's what happens when you splurge like that. Where did all that money come from, anyway? Brian mumbled something incoherent. I had a bad feeling about it. You didn't by chance use the living expenses I had been giving you to give to mother-in-law, did you? You have been passing it on to her, right? The person who reacted to my words was not Brian, but mother-in-law. Living expenses? What are you talking about? I've never received anything like that, mother-in-law said, seemingly genuinely unaware. Hey, what's going on here? Brian, explain it properly. Mother-in-law and I cornered Brian, who had shrunk considerably. I'm sorry, the living expenses. I used them for our dates. I felt my already icy affection for Brian grow even colder. He said he had spent the almost $2,000 I had been giving him every month. All of it. I told you that money was for groceries, utilities, and to thank mother-in-law. That money was mine in the first place. I'm sorry, my salary alone wasn't enough. It was clear what wasn't enough. The designer items Jessica had. Surely they must have been gifts from Brian. I swiftly raised my hand, but it was stopped by my mother-in-law. Brian, with hopeful eyes, watched as mother-in-law stopped me. He still seemed to think mother-in-law is on his side. You can't, Carol. If you lay a hand, it'll be your disadvantage, mother-in-law said, turning around to face Brian, then sharply slapped his cheek. To the stunned Brian, mother-in-law spoke calmly and monotonously. I've always thought the sillier the child, the cuter. I've spoiled you too much. Even with the bias, you grew up kind and your father and I were so happy when you got such a good wife, but now I'm cutting ties with you. But Mom, you're joking, right? Mother-in-law slapped away Brian's pleading hand and handed him a document. It contained a clause renouncing inheritance. Brian widened his eyes and muttered, I can't believe it. It doesn't matter if you can't believe it. It's all true. At mother-in-law's firm stance, Brian hung his head and signed. Make sure you write this too. I'll be claiming from Jessica as well. I'll add on the amount she spent. Oh yes, the company knows everything. Brian, completely dejected and seemingly out of arguments, signed all the documents I presented. Afterward, mother-in-law kicked Brian out. He had apparently been misusing company entertainment expenses and was claimed for reimbursement from the company. Brian is said to be living in an apartment without a bath, forced into a poor lifestyle with what's left after paying alimony and reimbursement. Claimed alimony from his mistress, Jessica. Turns out Jessica was married and her husband was away on business, so I contacted her husband through social media and claimed alimony. As a result, Jessica avoided divorce but had to quit her job. She was forced to live with her husband's family. They live in a rural area without internet connection, and she's said to be forced to work from dawn till dusk. I ended up being adopted by mother-in-law. Having lost my parents early, I decided to take care of mother-in-law till the end. Mother-in-law was initially reluctant because of Brian's infidelity. However, in the end, she accepted, and we sold the house, bought a new house for just the two of us. I want to take good care of mother-in-law.
You didn't hear me. A high school grad like you must be hard of hearing too. My kids deserve to be born to a much better woman. Education doesn't matter when it comes to love.
My husband used to say before we got married. Now he belittles me for only having a high school diploma, saying he's going to leave and remarry a woman with an elite college degree.
Ah, what a tragedy to end up with a low-educated woman like you. I'm truly unlucky.
With those bitter parting words, my husband eloped with a college-educated woman. My name is Abigail. I married James, who's 3 years older than me, at 25, and I'm turning 27 this year. I work as an administrative assistant at a trading company with only a high school diploma. We met through a mutual acquaintance from high school. My husband, unlike me, is an elite. He graduated from a prestigious university and works in sales for a big corporation. When we first met, I felt unworthy of his attention, but he kept saying,
"Your degree doesn't matter. I like you for who you are."
So I believed him and we got married. Unfortunately, it turns out that was a mistake. The moment we got married, he started looking down on me for my education and salary. From his perspective, a high school educated woman working at a small trading company must seem inferior, but he's the one who wanted to marry me. During our dating days, he sensed my insecurities and reassured me with kind words. That man is nowhere to be found now.
You should really find a new job, Abigail. Having a wife who works for such a low-paying company is embarrassing,
he shamelessly tells me. But I don't want to work for a demanding company right now because we're trying to conceive, and I also like my current job and company. His cold gaze silences me, my voice gradually shrinking. He sighs as if annoyed and retreats to the bedroom before I can say anything else. He probably assumed we were going to talk about our stagnant efforts to conceive again. He was right. I was hoping for a real discussion with my husband about our struggle to have a baby. From the beginning of our marriage, I always wanted kids, and my husband even optimistically talked about having 3 siblings. But all that was talk in the early days of our marriage, and the reality is that there is no baby in sight. I'd subtly hint at my husband to start thinking about having kids, but he avoided the conversation saying,
"I don't want to raise a kid born to a high school graduate."
His words left me stunned, and since then, we haven't really been able to talk face to face. Marriage had become a lonely affair. He'd belittle me every chance he got, reminding me to be grateful for being picked up by someone as elite as him, all while piling housework on me. And lately, he even stopped providing enough money for daily expenses. Apparently, according to him, I was bad with money and needed to save more. I had already cut corners wherever I could, even dipping into my savings from my single days when things got tough. You'd think I'd want a divorce by now, but fear held me back. The fear that he'd lash out if I brought it up. I was afraid to bring up divorce, worried that my husband would explode in anger. On top of that, I didn't want to betray my parents, who were so thrilled about our marriage and eagerly awaiting the birth of their first grandchild. As our marriage cooled off, my husband started spending less and less time at home. Coming home in the morning became the norm. If he came back drunk late at night, he'd wake me up to make him a snack. And whenever he came home late, I would always smell women's perfume on him. Even without a woman's intuition, it was clear. He was cheating. But I was too scared to confront the truth and kept procrastinating. Then, out of the blue, he said he was leaving.
My real love is finally pregnant, and I'm moving in with her tomorrow.
Stunned, I listened as he let out an exaggerated sigh.
Didn't you hear me? You're a high school grad with bad ears too. My exceptional genes are wasted on you.
He kept babbling about things I didn't even ask. Turns out, he was cheating on me with a younger woman who graduated from the same prestigious university as him. He said he was leaving me for her because she is now pregnant.
She's just starting her career, you see. Taking maternity leave right after joining a company would affect her career. Since I'm such a catch, I've had plenty of matchmaking offerings from my bosses. So I thought, why not marry someone for the time being?
That someone for the time being was apparently me. Maybe because there was no longer a need to hide. His face looked more grotesque than I had ever seen.
You work for a small trading company, right? I thought you might have some useful connections or something, but no. You have no valuable contacts and all you do is nag about having kids.
He stared at me intently after saying all this. Seeing me speechless, he snorted, stood up from the sofa, and muttered,
Ugh, what a tragedy. Marrying someone as uneducated as you. What a waste of my precious time.
He then walked out the front door without even sparing me a glance. I take deep breaths as I hear my husband lock the front door. My tense muscles, tightened by his overbearing demeanor, finally start to relax, and I break out in a cold sweat. Now that I know his schemes, there's no need to hesitate. I quickly finish my dinner that day and lock myself in my bedroom before he gets home. The next morning, I leave for work early and pick up divorce papers on my way. My hands are trembling with nervousness. I manage to unlock the front door. His shoes are gone. Not just the shoes. His favorite slippers and the sofa he loved in the living room are gone too. I search the entire house, fearing the worst. Sure enough, all of his stuff is missing. I haven't seen him since he left yesterday. I spot a bundle of papers carelessly placed on the table along with a flimsy envelope. I flip through the note, written in his meticulous angular handwriting, to find a filled-out divorce application. The note says to never contact him again, that he's already told his parents. I emotionlessly fill in the blanks on the divorce papers. Not a tear shed. Once finished, I pick up the envelope marked settlement money next to it. It's light, but inside there's $2,000. It must be intended as alimony for the divorce settlement. Though it's a meager amount, it can serve as a retainer for a lawyer to seek proper alimony later. I was planning to visit a law firm on my day off when my phone buzzed. It was my apartment manager, letting me know I owed rent for the past 2 months. They had tried to reach my husband but ended up calling me. My savings, already drained from covering our expenses, wouldn't make a dent. So, I had no choice but to use the $2,000 in that envelope. At the law firm, they told me it would be tough to claim any more money. I had spent most of the cash my husband left on rent. Doing that, apparently, would make it look like I had accepted a divorce settlement. I had a responsibility for the rent too, as we shared a home. I figured my husband knew I was out of savings. He probably left that $2,000 as a way to wash his hands off me, and I had fallen right into his trap. I couldn't survive when most of my income went to rent, so I started working for cheaper places. Eventually, I returned to my parents' home after they learned of my divorce and urged me to come back. They insisted I was still young and encouraged me to find another partner, saying it wasn't too late to have kids. Returning home, my parents kept reminding me that I was still young, that I could find another person if I tried to date again, and that I was not too old to have children. I felt a sense of guilt for disappointing them with the divorce. While commuting to my job, now a bit far from home, I also started dating again. I packed my schedule faster than one might expect for someone who just got divorced, partly because keeping busy helped distract my mind. Perhaps I wanted to overwrite the nightmare of my previous marriage with a fulfilling daily life. My efforts paid off sooner than I had anticipated. Within 2 years after my divorce, I had remarried and given birth to a daughter. My new husband, Daniel, was the same age as me and also a high school graduate. After high school, he worked in an auto repair shop near my parents' house, and we met at a local singles mixer. Daniel was initially concerned about his educational level, but I assured him I wasn't like my ex, who judged people based on their credentials. Daniel, in turn, never looked down on me for my background. He was always generous and accepting. We built our new home close to my parents, and my days were filled with parenting and work. Life was busy, but happy. My thoughts of my ex-husband had long faded into oblivion. I unexpectedly ran into him about 10 years after our divorce. I was attending a Spanish speech and debate competition with my daughter.
"Is that you, Abigail?"
A man called out to me from behind. I turned around. Although he had aged, I immediately recognized the face, one I would rather not have seen. Next to my ex stood a young boy, about the same age as my daughter. Noticing my gaze, my ex-husband said with an unconcerned smile,
"This is my child, with Abby. She's an elite too. Graduated from a national university. The kid has the potential, and we're investing a lot in gifted education."
Abby must be the college-educated woman he ran off with. He takes the liberty to brag about how smart his own child is, regardless of my feelings. As I quietly let it slide, he quickly glances at my daughter.
"So what about your husband? He's a high school grad too, isn't he? Knowing you?"
What he says is true, but admitting my current husband is also a high school graduate will likely make his insults worse. Wanting to avoid trouble, I neither confirm nor deny and quickly try to leave the scene with my daughter.
"No, I can tell the face of a kid who's a high school grad. They look as dumb as anyone else around. There's no way such a kid could speak fluent Spanish."
His insulting words, thrown at me even as he stepped in my way, left me stunned. In front of my child. He had no qualms about looking down on another child he had just met. I couldn't believe how nasty he was. Though my daughter might not understand what high school grad means, she probably sensed she was being spoken ill of. Seeing her face scrunch up as if she were about to cry, I stared fearlessly at my ex. "Would you mind not insulting children? Aren't you ashamed as a father?" He brushes off my anger nonchalantly.
"Hey, I'm just telling the truth. It's presumptuous for a high school grad to enter a Spanish contest. Just play in the park where you belong.
Having said his piece, my ex-husband grabs his child's hand and vanishes into the crowd. While a deep anger starts to bubble up within me, I catch my daughter's anxious face and rein in my emotions. It's all right. You've practiced a lot. If you do just like you practiced at home, you'll win for sure. Mommy guarantees it. Our eyes meet, and I speak softly to her. I need to stay strong for her. She nods, slowly, digesting my words. After registering, I leave my daughter and enter the spectator area. Now all I can do is believe in her ability. I take a deep breath and wait for her contest to begin. Including my ex-husband's child, most of the young contestants were nervous and stumbled through their speeches. As for my daughter, even without parental bias, I thought she was by far the best, delivering her speech in fluent Spanish without hesitation. My prediction was accurate. She won the Spanish speech and debate contest, holding a large bouquet and with a medal around her neck. We leave the venue hand in hand. Next, we're going to celebrate with some steak, just as planned.
Abigail, wait up!
A loud voice chases after me from behind. I quickly shield my daughter behind me and turn around to face my ex-husband. His eyes are red-rimmed, as if he'd been crying. Peeking out from behind me, my daughter's medal catches his eye, and he looks at it enviously.
How can your kid win first place? There's no way a child raised by a high school grad could be so articulate.
Turns out, he's upset because his own child didn't place, while my daughter won the competition. He rants, assuming that my husband, my daughter, and I couldn't possibly speak Spanish. People leaving the venue glanced at him, puzzled by his outburst, but he seems oblivious.
Where did you enroll her? Or did you hire a tutor with whatever little you make?
We didn't enroll her in any classes, and we didn't hire a tutor, I reply plainly. His eyes widen in disbelief.
No way! You can barely speak Spanish yourself.
Did you forget about my job? His puzzled expression deepens. I work in an import-export office, where speaking some Spanish makes the job easier. Besides, my grandfather lives in Spain. I've been accustomed to Spanish since I was little. My daughter learned it naturally, talking with him. I stroke my daughter's head as she peeks out from behind me. I've conversed in Spanish with my grandfather ever since I can remember. I chose my line of work because it allowed me to use my Spanish skills. My daughter started speaking Spanish naturally because we've been video calling with her great-grandfather to show him how she's growing up. I've never forced her to learn Spanish. All my husband and I did was support our daughter. Follow your passion and you'll excel. As they say, my daughter has grown to converse with her native Spanish-speaking grandfather without needing a translator. My ex starts trembling as he listens to my explanation, his face flushed a deep red, boiling with humiliation. Losing to someone he had looked down on must have been a more significant blow to his ego than he had anticipated.
I can't believe this. I'm going to complain to the organizers. My child was unfairly judged.
In a fit of rage, my ex-husband stormed back into the venue, leaving our child behind. Not wanting to leave my child alone, I waited silently for him to return. Soon enough, security escorted him out of the building, gripping him by both arms. Gritting his teeth, it was clear he wasn't thrilled that my daughter won. As he aggressively approached me, a woman's voice suddenly called out to him.
James, what a coincidence running into you here.
She wore a crisp pantsuit and had an event badge hanging around her neck. My ex-husband's anger cooled as his shoulders tensed up. I couldn't just walk away, so I stood there, keeping my daughter behind me, watching.
So, James, you have a kid. I heard you were single. Is this woman next to you your wife?
Caught off guard, I shook my head vehemently. No, he's my ex-husband.
Oh, so this child is yours and James's.
She eyed the boy standing next to my ex-husband with her piercing gaze. No, that's the son from the woman he married after divorcing me. Her eyes lit up. Sweating and looking pale, my ex-husband was clearly distressed. What happened next needs no explanation. Sensing impending chaos, I fled the scene. It turns out, after marrying a college-educated woman, he'd been having an affair with another educated woman involving in the Spanish speech and debate tournament. She quickly realized she was his side chick upon seeing him with a child. Naturally, the affair infuriated his well-educated wife. She took their child and went back to her parents' house the next day. Now, he's scrambling to pay child support, alimony for the divorce, and education loans. Word got around his office about how he had been serial dating women based on their educational backgrounds, forcing him to resign. As for my daughter, she later participated in the national Spanish speech competition. While she didn't win, her near-native language skills drew much attention, and her interest in Spanish only grew. With my current husband's support, I left my long-time job at a trading company. Now, I teach Spanish from home and assist my grandfather with translating novels.